Episode 62 of RE0 is titled Regulus Corneus, and as an astute member of my Twitch chat pointed out before we watched, every episode that uses a character's name as the title so far has featured that character's backstory. Episode 11 is called Rem. It shows the twins' childhood and the threshold moment of the village attack that costs Ram her horn. Episode 20 is Wilhelm van Austria, and features him and Teresia meeting, courting, and fighting, likewise a seminal event in his life. Episode 40 has two titles, but the first is Otto Suin. We learn about his troubled childhood and how his divine protection shaped the path he walks. And then just last episode, we had Liliana Masquerade, where we watched her struggle on her own until reaching the watershed moment where she understood what kind of bard she should be. All of these episodes involved extensive flashbacks to the younger days of the title characters, and all showed a key event meant to help us understand the character in the present. And these are also key events that only the audience learns. Each in its own way added emotional depth that allowed us to invest more heavily in those characters' journeys, and each emphasized the influence of the past over the present. Does this episode match that pattern? There are no flashbacks to Regulus' childhood, we don't learn anything about how he became the Archbishop of Greed or joined the witch's cult, and even the emotional stakes of the episode are focused elsewhere, on the wives, and on Emilia and Subaru. The episode is ostensibly about Regulus, but he seems more like a side character to the other dramas playing out. It's different, right? But why? Does the fact that he's an antagonist means the previous pattern shouldn't apply? Or is it different because insight might lead us to sympathize with him, and we simply aren't meant to? Or is it different because he dies, so there is no need to better understand? Well, I submit that the pattern is not fundamentally different at all. This episode utilizes the same core technique as all the other character name examples. Past events are brought into focus because of how they are shaping outcomes in the present. There is even a threshold moment hidden inside Regulus's long internal rant that only the audience learns, so that trend continues as well. The reason the episode feels like a departure is because this link between past and present is not constrained to the actions of the title character. But that very difference is critical to appreciating what the episode accomplishes. An additional level of commentary on Regulus that we only notice because of the contrast with the established pattern. This episode draws an astonishing number of threads together, and we're going to run through them all. But first, I had asked for questions in the comments in last episode's video, and you guys delivered. I said I'd pick a few and answer them this week, which I will do in just a moment. I'd like you to do the same this week, and for each of these remaining videos, but please, remember we are only interested in the anime version of the story. I had to have source reading volunteers go through and remove spoilering comments and questions. I know people are excited about anime viewers catching up to a story they love, and I know it's tempting to confirm or deny the speculations I set forth. But we ultimately want to learn how this tale unfolds through the art form of animation, not the comments on YouTube videos. Now, for choosing questions, I've skipped some that would require too long or too short of an answer. However, I'm collecting them, and I may do something with the rest when the season is over, so don't be discouraged or think you need to ask the same thing each week. We also stream about new episodes twice on Wednesdays as well, which is another pretty good place to ask questions. I'm going to give 3 answers, but for the first one, I'm going to combine 3 questions together where I feel my answers would be related. I chose these because my answers might be very relevant to the upcoming episodes, so I should probably put them out there now. For this 3-in-1 answer, the questions are all about witch factors in general, gluttony in particular. Numa Ash recalls that I like to speculate about the direction of the story with the question, what would be the absolute worst outcome for Subaru? And in that vein, what do I think the worst possible fate of Rem for Subaru would be? They list some possibilities. So, what is the worst outcome for Rem? Let's Play Sass Chag GD 9331 asks if I've thought about the possibility that the white whale might not have the power to erase people's existences. Couldn't it have been Lie all along, hiding in the mist? Is erasing of memories really befitting of Daphne, of her beliefs? In other words, would Daphne have made the whale to erase people, or is that just Lie and company's personal shtick? And then, Kevin OK4707 talks about the witch factor of envy. We can assume that return by death is an extension of that power that Satala has chosen to share with Subaru, but she also possesses shadow hands, which are animated almost identically to the unseen hands. It just seems to me that perhaps envy's authority has something to do with mimicry. It would make sense thematically, since it would require Satala to envy the abilities and powers of others to gain them. That would also mean that return by death may be a copy of another authority that enables time travel, and then they go on to provide further reasoning. I've included that last one because it's something I've been wondering myself. What we know about Satala is fragmented and unreliable. Betty gives us the second-hand popular understanding that she devoured the other 6 witches and drained half the world dry. Cruge erroneously believed that she created the white whale, so it's likely most people are confused on that point. Puck indicates that Satala could grow 2,000 shadow hands when he fights with Betelgeuse, and we seem to see a kind of demonstration of this when she manifests in the sanctuary. Echidna adds her own 2 cents about Satala killing the other witches to use as sustenance, but she also clearly hates Satala, and it's hard to know how much to take at face value. But whether due to mimicry or due to consuming the other witches, as lore suggests, Satala does seem to have a version of unseen hands. And there is also a time-related power among the witches, namely, greed. Echidna's Tome of Wisdom either peers into or calculates the future, while Regulus uses the greed witch factor to stop time for his body, an eternal present. So, Satala copying or stealing this power to enable travel to the past might neatly fit together. But there's another thing she does that I've been pondering as a possible stolen or mimicked power. The consuming of the sanctuary, because to me, that looks like gluttony. If you recall, Subaru was consumed by Satala and felt himself enter a kind of timeless space that wasn't death. He wondered if she was just going to keep loving him forever, until he realizes Echidna gave him an escape route with the modified handkerchief. Upon waking, though, we learn that while he was consumed, all of the memories of the others she'd swallowed were mixed up with his own. This is how he finds the facility housing Ruzio Meyer and knows to use the stone to get inside. Well, when I made a video about episode 59, I pointed out that the way Lai and Roy behaved seemed most like they were channeling Rem and Yoshua respectively, as though momentarily becoming them, or experiencing things as they would have experienced them. Comments from Puck and Ram in Season 2 suggest that Rem's soul is somewhere besides her body, and I've taken that to mean that she is actually trapped inside Lai alongside whoever else he has consumed. So, to refer back to the question of the white whale and whether Daphne would make a beast that would erase people, I don't think it's Lai, I think it's the whale. What these all have in common, Daphne and gluttony, it's not that they erase, it's that they eat, they consume. And when you consume something, it becomes part of you. If food, you extract energy and nutrients and pass the rest. But if you consume something like names and memories or souls, then I wager it just remains a part of you. So then, the worst thing I can imagine for Rem isn't that she never wakes, or that she wakes but remains without memory or name. The worst I can imagine is that she is inside Lai, completely awake, and her experience is like what Subaru went through inside of Satala, except that for her, it has drug on for more than a year, and she is mixed with all the souls already there and added afterwards, and she will wake up one day with both the memory of that experience and all the other people's memories besides. How would she not go mad from that? How would she hold on to her sense of identity if they are intermixed in the same way Subaru was? Now, granted, there is a neat opportunity to cause her to learn something useful the way he did, but what a cost. We'll now wait and see how the gluttony situation is explored in the remaining episodes, and perhaps that will both answer what to expect for Rem's situation and whether Satala was indeed copying or borrowing witch factor powers. The next question is another one better answered sooner rather than later. Shalik asks how I see the season ending. Like, are they going to beat all the archbishops? Are any of Subaru's allies going to die or be permanently injured? Just want to hear my thoughts. Well, I definitely think they will beat all the archbishops in the sense of wrestling back control of the city, but I'm not sure beyond that. I'll be surprised if any other archbishops die besides Regulus, with the possible exception of one of the gluttonies, if they even can die individually. Regulus was the archbishop we had spent the most time with, and this episode completes our picture of him, so he was the smart money to bet on for an archbishop death. The others simply haven't been explored very thoroughly, and so leaving them in the story for the future feels like a reasonable expectation. If I could tie this answer into my previous one, then I think what I'd like is to see Roy die and cause Joshua to regain his name and memories. He could then relate his experience while consumed. If it ends up being like what Subaru experienced inside Satila, then he will not only recognize the similarity, he will also realize that Rem must be experiencing something similar, which will be devastating but also very motivating. And that would also give us an answer as to whether Satila has copied the gluttony power. Now, as to whether we lose allies to death or injury, I mostly don't expect any deaths. That seems to be something the series steers away from. Instead, people tend to get sidelined the way Rem, Kruge, Betty, and Mimi have all been sidelined. I'm most worried about Betty in all this, as it's still unclear what the cultists want with her, and the longer we go without her coming up in conversation, the more likely it is we have a shocker in store. They ostensibly know how to wake her from the suspended animation, but have made no effort to do so. That also contributes to my apprehension. But if there is a death, then I feel the most likely candidate is Wilhelm. He's been living this tragic love story and family chaos for 15 years, and I can see the appeal of tying it together in a situation where he dies by Teresia's hand, but Reinhard and/or Heinkel get involved, and things are made right in a too little, too late kind of manner. Liliana would get to write another act to the Sword Demon's love song, at the very least. For the last question, as 936 asks, out of the 5 candidates, who do you think is most suited to be the ruler of Lagunica? I don't know what the dragon wants, or how the people of Lagunica assess their rulers, so I guess I'll answer as if I was a citizen and was choosing who would rule me. If you'd asked me at the end of Season 1, the answer would be Kruge, and no one else is even close. But her memory loss really has stolen her moxie, so while she's not out of the running, it's much more of a toss-up now. Anastasia seems to have the most experience organizing a lot of people and is quite shrewd, which are good qualities for statesmanship. But without knowing the scale of the thing she's hiding, it's hard to endorse her. Priscilla has turned out to have hidden depths, but her disinterest in people results in her rarely playing well with others, so it's hard to imagine her regime operating very smoothly. This leaves Felt and Amelia. Felt managing to organize the slums in a year's time with limited resources should not be overlooked. That's being a leader on hard mode, so imagine how she could manage with the kingdom at her disposal. And heck, she might already be a royal anyway. But her slum origin and the way she continues to embrace it will almost certainly cause a lot of issues between her and the nobility. That's before she does anything to try to address the poor living conditions she grew up in. She has a good head for priorities, though, going by how she acted in the 2 instances involving Heinkel trying to rattle Reinhard. She is a good choice. Amelia's biggest hurdle is simply being the silver-haired half-elf, as Lagunica seems to discriminate against demi-humans in general and half-elves in particular. But the more her faction is involved in bringing down witch cult archbishops, the harder it will be for people to believe she's associated with the cult or Satila. This seems like it's easier to address than the friction that I expect between Felt and the nobles. However, Amelia is probably the least worldly of all the candidates, and that inexperience is a liability for leadership. But like Felt, she has a good head for judging what's important, and has built up a valuable team around her, especially with Roz bound by the oath, and the way Subaru draws other powerful people to himself. So, my answer is this. If Anastasia's secret is innocuous, then choose her. If it's not, then choose Felt if the decision is going to be made soon. But if the choice is still a ways off, then I pick Amelia, as she has the most upside and the most diverse talents among her retinue. Just consider how she handled herself in this episode, which we will now do, returning to our discussion of episode 62. So, as I said, this episode is full of links between past and present, and I'm going to run through them in order. They largely fall into 2 categories: characters leveraging past experience to help them solve the problem in front of them, and parallels between scenes in this episode and scenes in past episodes. And sometimes it's both, as in the very first example, when Amelia is trying to convince the girl we now know as Sylphie to help her uncover the secret of Regulus's invincibility. Amelia asks her name and talks about the ways they are the same, and generally is trying to counter Regulus's dehumanization of his wives. But Sylphie resists. Why go to the trouble to make them human again after all this? They've resigned themselves to be obedient dolls to stay alive, and that is all the fight they can manage. And she asks what Amelia even knows about any of them. She says that they are kind, and Sylphie repeats the demand, to which Amelia replies she knows they're trying their hardest. And when Sylphie asks a third time, Amelia interrupts to say that they were crying out for help, that everything about her was pleading, "Help me." This is a very close parallel to one of Season 2's emotional climaxes, when Subaru is trying to get Betty to leave the library. She was also stubbornly clinging into a situation untenable but familiar, while he tried to coax her out of it. And she, too, asks what Subaru knows about her, and he, too, first replies that she is kind. She also argues, "Don't talk as if you know me," and he also continues. At the very end of the scene, he asserts that Betty was also pleading for help to leave her situation, evidenced by her always sitting by the door. His tactic during this effort is not just to offer help, but to ask for her help. He wants to save her, but needs her to save him in kind. This is also what Amelia asks of the wives, for them to help her so she can save them and everyone else. This pattern of countering someone's doubts also brings to mind another pair of parallel scenes from the first season. The first time, it is Rem countering all of Subaru's negativity and self-doubt with affirmations and love. He then uses that as his model to do the same for Amelia, countering her misgivings and insecurities with praises and reassurances. So even though Amelia wasn't there to witness his exchange with Betty, she had an earlier example to draw from and gets her own chance to pay it forward. And in truth, this entire attempt only works at all because of the past time that Amelia spent building a rapport between the two of them. This whole episode is largely a payoff for Amelia's captivity and her decision to stay rather than flee. Once Sylphie asks whether any of the wives love him and gets 50 variations of hell no, Amelia finds herself past their defenses, and they can try to solve the problem of Regulus's invincibility together. The wives are experiencing hope for the first time in a while. No solution comes to mind at first, and Sylphie wonders if it could be a mistake. But because of Amelia's past experiences with Subaru, she wouldn't doubt him when it comes to things that are this important. Her faith is well placed, as a spirit investigation reveals the truth, a parasitic heart attached to Sylphie's own, keeping Regulus alive while his heart is stopped. This awful reveal leads Sylphie to grab a shard of glass, preparing to cut her own throat, and now another past conversation comes to mind. When Amelia returned to her room after spying, Sylphie confronted her, not understanding why she came back, and Amelia realizes that she'd hoped she would stay gone. Sylphie confirms, for she would have been engulfed by her husband's fury if she had, and now everything will remain unchanged. She does not hope to be free, can only dream of dying instead. And though Amelia will try to encourage her, Sylphie will reply that Amelia is free to insist she won't give up, but she won't be tempted again. The other wives would say the same. Basically, then and now, the conversation is about the downside of hope. Making themselves numb and invisible and obedient is easier to tolerate than hoping for something that never comes. This is the temptation she referred to, and what Amelia was fighting against at the beginning of the episode. But now that all the wives had started to hope, only to discover the parasitic heart, as well as their conjecture that it would simply move to each of them in turn, well, they immediately crash into a deeper despair than the one which originally gripped them. Each will pick up their own shards to follow suit. No belief in any other means to defy Regulus. Even Amelia is affected, reflecting on her own past despair as she asks herself why she even left the forest. But perhaps because she does so, she remembers her own suspension in the ice. The past comes to the rescue again. She stops all 53 wives from cutting their throats simultaneously, which is precisely why she knew she'd accounted for them all, and freezes them to stop their pulse in a bid to defeat the invincibility. As Amelia herself says, it seems it won't be that easy, as the heart has jumped to her instead. Apparently, just considering her a candidate for bride was enough for this kind of magic to work, which strikes me as a parallel to the first season, when Subaru ended up being one of the bodies Betelgeuse could jump to, and perhaps for the same reason. Like then, a more creative approach is required. In a delightfully symmetrical development, that earlier situation will inspire the solution to this one. In a delightfully ironic development, it will be Regulus himself that provides the inspiration. Convinced he has the upper hand, he begins to gloat and denigrate, disparaging Subaru's accomplishment of defeating Betelgeuse by disparaging Betelgeuse, and that causes Subaru to think back to how he managed to do so. He remembers the unseen hands, and remembers mentioning return by death to bring Subtitled close after Juice jumped into his body, and then the similarity between the sloth witch factor and Subtitled's own disembodied hand, which, if you recall, made its very first appearance by gripping Subaru's heart. Well, someone does happen to have a certain witch factor stashed away, even if he's not entirely confident in his ability to wield it. But the past provides guidance once more. There's two things I really like in how this sequence begins. The first is yet another example of the progress Emilia and Subaru have made as a team, as she is tense and on guard against Regulus until Subaru pipes up, at which point she immediately relaxes and smiles. She's confident he's worked something out. He nevertheless asks for her trust before he proceeds, and she not only gives it, but encourages him further, that she'll always believe he can make things work out. The second thing is the emphasis on how hard Subaru concentrates on the task at hand, how much of himself he pours into this desperate attempt. That he also uses Betelgeuse's name for the ability instead of his own, it feels like something of an homage and something of defiance towards Regulus, who moments earlier was dismissive of the former Archbishop. From there, we get a veritable cascade of parallels. The shot of Subaru with the hand extending towards Emilia recalls when Satala stretched her arms towards the spirit of Betelgeuse, but where that scene was dark and indistinct, the one in the present is bright and clear, a wholesome reversal. In fact, this is the second time an invisible hand has made contact with Emilia's heart, as the first was when Satala crushed it because Subaru tried to mention return by death. This instance will heal her heart instead, a similar reversal. And when Subaru makes contact, something about the sloth witch factor still bears the mark of its former owner. But Emilia doesn't think of the Betelgeuse Subaru fought, she thinks of his lighter former self, reversing once again. He was a spirit, and she is someone quite attuned to them, so perhaps part of Juice resides within the witch factor even now. I, for one, rather like the idea that the old Juice in some form is helping Subaru in this task, reaching out from the distant past to try to protect Emilia one last time. Though Subaru succeeds, it takes a lot out of him, and he immediately collapses. Emilia rushes over to him, and in doing so, we get yet another parallel. She puts her hand on his shoulder out of concern, and we switch to show Regulus concentrating on something. Switching again, we're in his point of view, focused on that comforting hand, and the wider picture of these two showing concern and affection towards one another in this desperate situation. That should look rather familiar, because he witnessed the same scenario between Juice and Fortuna in the past when they stood against him. And while I don't know exactly what Regulus is thinking in either case, I have to imagine he knows none of his wives would rush to him in concern, or affectionately put their hand on his shoulder to reassure him. To Fortuna and Juice, he complains about them ignoring him and having fun on their own. Likewise, he interrupts Subaru and Emilia to complain about them having a moment and leaving him in the dark. But now, talk is all he has, as his cheat has been defeated, and Emilia follows through on what the wives asked of her, to make sure she relays their anger to him. She actually does punch him 53 times, by the way. She really would never miscount people's lives. I appreciate that she adds her own personal touch for the bonus 54th strike, as she was supposed to be the bonus 54th wife. We still have a few more parallels remaining. Regulus complains about a 2-on-1 fight, and so Subaru agrees to a little mano-a-mano action once he notices Reinhard about to make his return. Subaru invokes this parallel himself, apologizing to Reinhard for doing this again, but saying that the finale is all up to him. He's referring to the fight with Elsa way back in the very first arc, where Reinhard likewise showed up at the last second to deliver the coup de grace. And we get another parallel to that situation as well. After launching Regulus far into the sky, Reinhard will end up on top of him. He invokes his divine protection of cold-blooded one-liners to tell Regulus that in a true duel, he would have withdrawn his sword the moment Regulus lost the will to fight, which is him saying that he will not be showing any such mercy here, and probably also that this was no true duel, as Regulus is not worthy of such honor. Then, the parallel. Regulus calls him a monster, just as Subaru called Regulus a monster after seeing his sword strike demolish half the building. Back then, Reinhard said that even he is a bit hurt by such a comment, but in the present, he simply agrees with Regulus. I am a monster that hunts monsters. Finally, at the end before the stinger, we get to see Emilia and Subaru at last able to relax and just be reunited with one another. They're side by side looking out at the moon, which reminds me of the end of Season 2, after Subaru has officially become her knight, and they manage to find a short window to be alone amid the celebration. Even though this isn't the end of Season 3, Subaru's comment about what Reinhard is for, and the rest being stronger than he is, suggests to me that these two are bowing out of most of the rest of the season. So this has the same kind of denouement feeling as that balcony moon-gazing did. In both cases, Emilia is not in her standard outfit. Now, that is a whole lot of past influences and parallels, and almost none of them involved the title character. To me, this departure is commentary. For all the other episodes named after a character, what we learn about them helps us understand their journey, where they began, where they are now, and why they managed to change and grow. In the case of Regulus, his defining feature is that he does not change. He does not grow. He is not on any kind of character journey, and there are thus no illuminating flashbacks to share in the first place. Naming the episode after him, but filling it with examples of all these other characters having their presence bolstered by their pasts, throws his stagnation into sharp relief. It's practically the series insulting him. One might even say that it's a grave violation of his rights. But there is one small part entirely focused on him, so let us now examine that. I'm glad the series established Regulus' tendency to chatter ad nauseum early and remain dedicated to that as his shtick. It's a clever choice because of what it communicates to us, and because of the kinds of scenes it enables. Subaru gets to be right genre savvy for a change in this episode, when he correctly intuits that Regulus is the kind to do a little revealing villainous monologue rather than just finishing the job. Amusingly, this is only useful for the audience, because Emilia figures everything out on her own anyway. We might ordinarily roll our eyes when a bad guy talks instead of concentrating on killing the good guy as soon as possible, but we completely accept it from Regulus because it would actually feel out of place for him to do otherwise. Him just watching with a smirk as Emilia and Subaru pull a trick with unseen hand perfectly suits his pattern, because this tendency of his to yap is part of his hubris and part of his insecurity. It's the kind of character trait that I could see arising organically. Normally, the villain monologuing is a tired trope because it enables their defeat, but in Regulus's case, he truly has never had anything to fear. No one can harm him with his heart stopped, and so there's no rush to eliminate any threats in front of him. Instead, they provide him with a captive audience as he either rants about perceived slights, belittles the person struggling against him, or gloats about his own superiority. These are his favorite pastimes, because Regulus at his core is a weakling, deeply insecure and cowardly. Tearing others down, building himself up, and constantly playing the victim are the ways he massages and buttresses his fragile ego. Forcing others to listen to him, or trying to demand they show him respect, comes from the same place as forcing the wives to marry him. He is creating an illusion of acceptance and worthiness for himself. It's poetic justice, then, that his final two rants have no audience at all. After Reinhard launches Regulus skyward, he internally reels from how the day has turned against him, at first trying to reject the reality itself, then falling back to declaring himself the victim. He asserts that he's the most fulfilled, the most complete as an individual, but this is just the necessary delusion to cover his inadequacy. After all, if he could improve in any way, it would mean he is flawed. He must insist he's always right because he can't handle being wrong. I've spoken at length about his characterization in other videos, and don't want to completely rehash. But in short, Regulus' trick of being changeless in body, and therefore invincible, has led him to be changeless in character, and therefore stunted. That to change at all would be to admit that there is some better way he could be, and that's not an idea he has enough strength to entertain. As his rant goes along, we really do get an important insight, the thing that keeps this episode consistent with the others bearing character names. What Regulus is really afraid of is that people might laugh at him. It's probably why he gets so agitated when knocked around despite his invincibility, of fearing he might momentarily look like a fool. He even seems paranoid about it, saying, "I can hear you laughing. You're looking at me, aren't you? You looked at me and laughed. What's so funny about me?" And this dovetails into his thoughts about his wives, finally revealing the origin of the most eccentric demand that he makes of them, that they never change expression. He thinks of his first wife, who never laughed even as he killed her family and other suitors until it was just the two of them. It's as it should be, he thinks. Wives don't need to laugh. And he even tries to insist that it's not because he doesn't let them. I guess admitting to himself that he's forced a situation where no one laughs at him is akin to admitting that they otherwise might. And then Regulus appears to experience a flashback, as his rant turns into more of a reaction. "Wait, why are you laughing?" And then he screams in fury for them to stop. I'm going to wager that the first wife really did laugh at him at some point, and this shapes his approach to all future wives. But as his vision shifts to an imagination of dead wives rather than a memory, it's clear that it didn't work out the way he hoped. In their last moments, the wives get their revenge, smiling as they welcome death, an act he perceives as mocking him, laughing from beyond the grave. And then, a telling line, "I will not end up alone." The high number of wives might serve a pragmatic purpose when it comes to his heart, but it appears some part of his motivation is a fear of having no one. Yet rather than become someone others would actually want to associate with, he's leaned on his power to force the issue. And because he avoids introspection, he truly doesn't understand when he asks the Vision wives how they can see him ending up alone and laugh, saying he deserves it. He puts the blame on them and repeats to himself that it's not his fault, before Reinhard interrupts him. In this, then, we understand that he is not going to change or begin to change, that his last moments hold no redemption or revelation. There is no character journey for Regulus. Even after Reinhard sends him deep into the ground, Regulus still thinks only of his bruised ego. This will not stand. He'll kill them all, especially that woman. This thought leads to his one actual flashback, remembering the person who was supposed to be wife number 79. Apparently that was Fortuna, and so now it rather makes sense why he'd think of Amelia as an appropriate substitute. By remembering, though, he makes a connection. This must be that little girl. The hole fills with water, and drowning is definitely not something that temporary invulnerability will help with, so Regulus now actually thinks about his own death. But this does not turn him remorseful. Instead, the thought of Amelia avenging her mother and Juice makes him want to vomit. She would be getting one over on him, beating him in more ways than just killing him, and the way that makes him feel small is the worst pain of all. He dies worked into an absolute frenzy at the thought of her rejoicing in his death, and so even to his last moment, Regulus is still most concerned with what other people think of him. Fitting, then, that Amelia cannot remember where she had met him before, has no idea that she partially avenged Fortuna and Juice. I'm guessing this has something to do with Pandora sending him away, or the general trauma of that day, but the why doesn't matter so much as the fact that Regulus fretted his last moments away over nothing. She's not a satisfied avenger, nor gloating at his death. In fact, as she said, she pities him more than anyone else in the world. The small time she spent with him was enough for her to figure him out completely, declaring that what he says changes from one line to the next, and everything he talks about is so empty. She'd also previously called him out on his assertion that he was fulfilled, pointing out how this must be a lie since everything he says is "I want this" and "I want that." In fact, it's a rather effective choice to have Amelia be the person that metes out so much punishment in the episode. She's one of the most patient and understanding characters in the entire story, continuing to help people even after they reject her or steal from her. For Amelia to be put into a state where she enthusiastically causes harm, Regulus's crimes must be heinous indeed. It's fitting for one other reason as well. Amelia is a woman, and in our completed picture of Regulus, we understand that he deeply hates and fears women. Now, this is the last thing I want to talk about then. The way RE0 uses and portrays its female characters, and how Regulus is used as a counterpoint for emphasis. There is a saying that is apocryphally attributed to Margaret Atwood, since it arose from things she did say, and the most common version goes like this: "Men are afraid that women will laugh at them, women are afraid that men will kill them. If you told me Regulus's entire characterization was conceived from that quote, I might believe you, for his internal rant reveals that he is a literal manifestation of that idea. They laugh, he kills. But in broader terms, that saying concisely illustrates that men and women inhabit different worlds, have fears that are not just different in their nature, but in their severity. Unsurprisingly then, stories are often populated with women in mortal danger, invoking real concern in the audience and commiserate relief when the threat is averted. Often the rescuers are male characters, which is sometimes used as a romantic inflection point, but generally follows a broader pattern in which male and female characters also inhabit different worlds. This is sometimes called men act, women react, or men act, women are, but there's a widely observable trend across a lot of storytelling that splits male and female characters into primarily active and passive roles, respectively. Men are the doers, the proactive members of the cast, and are often defined by the actions they take. Conversely, women are often defined by personality or appearance, wait for events to occur that they then react to, and drive the plot by inspiring actions rather than performing them. It's my opinion that RE0 bucks this trend so thoroughly that it must be a conscious choice to do so. It's most obvious in the candidate knight pairs, where women like Anastasia and Kruge unquestionably pursue their own objectives and make their own decisions, while their knights and other retainers dutifully wait to react. The most lopsided mismatch of Street Kid Felt with the Master Swordsman nevertheless results in a dynamic where she does as she sees fit and he struggles to keep pace. Not even our protagonist is immune. Subaru is not very goal-oriented for a main character, but it's because he has fixed his wagon to Emilia instead. Her goals are his goals, though it did take him a long time to stop thinking of her in terms of traditional roles as he saw them. It's part of his character arc. Even when romantic feelings are involved, the women in the story do not revert to passivity. Rem loved Subaru, but still took it on herself to leave him at the inn for his safety against what he would have wished. Likewise, Ram loved Roswal, but still crafted and carried out a plan to destroy his Tome of Wisdom. And for all that Roswal turned out to be a puppet master directing so many of the events in the first and second season, he had a woman behind him further pulling his strings. Certainly, no one can accuse the witches of being passive, reactive creatures. The kingdom also seems to have no issue with women in leadership roles. Kruge is head of her household, and Anastasia at least appears to run the Hoshin company, and certainly commands the Iron Fang. Priscilla inherited lands and drew influential people to herself. The mayor of Arlon Village is this woman. Even the witch's cult has no issue with female archbishops. Women also do plenty of the hero's work of saving, such as Emilia saving Subaru from thugs right at the beginning, Rem saving him from Betelgeuse's captivity, or Betty saving the sanctuary from the Great Rabbit. Against all this, Regulus and his nonsense sticks out like a sore thumb. There are plenty of imaginings of fantasy feudal settings where his slave harem would just seem like an unfortunate reality of the world they inhabit, and the way he forces them into utterly passive roles, something understood as a differing cultural value. But not in this world, though. It feels unnatural, like he was plucked from another part of the continent or some other story entirely. Even his dismissive and double-standard rhetoric against women feels out of place, as we have vanishingly few examples of misogynistic comments from any other character. It's almost as though his chauvinistic outlook is turned up to the point of hyperbole just to emphasize how little of that exists anywhere else in the story. A last thought, then, to best illustrate this point. I was rather apprehensive back when Emilia was kidnapped, fearing we were going to get a damsel in distress situation. That trope is the poster child for the passive-active split between female and male characters, taking a woman's autonomy entirely out of the story and reducing her role to simply motivation for her rescuer, no doubt some heroic man. From where we are now, it instead seems like a brilliant subversion. Regulus is the standard-bearer for that kind of enforced gender role expectation, and so for him to create the impression of a damsel in distress is just him operating in a way consistent with his worldview. In so doing, though, he puts in motion his own demise. not because of male rescuers who came to free the damsel, but because of Emilia, who created rapport with one of his wives, stayed for their sake when she could have fled, and earned their cooperation long enough to isolate his vulnerability. She didn't remain passive or helpless during her captivity, didn't meekly submit to wedding vows, and actively took the fight to him as soon as the others were safe. Emilia was never the damsel. That role belongs to the wives. But because Regulus could only see her as a woman, and can only think of a woman as a thing to possess and control, he missed what she really was, the rescuing hero who came to free all the damsels from their captivity.